Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the artist of comics like iZombie, X-Statix, and Batman Dark Age, the cartoonist behind Madman, and the focal point for this soon-to-be-Kickstarted art book, The Marvel Art of Michael Allred. It's Michael Allred. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So we are recording this on Thursday, October 10th. How has the day been for you so far? What have you been working on today?
Actually, I'm working on a one-shot with Matt Fraction and Patton Oswalt, a Minor Threats one-shot, and cleaned out my hobby room where I build things and the garage.
I was going to say, based on your Instagram, I kind of feel like you've probably been working on a new droid build or something today from Star Wars.
Actually, there's three things in the works. My Mona Lisa is a 1/6 scale X-Wing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that wow is right. When I started, I knew it was going to be big, but it's insane.
Yeah.
But for me, it's the Star Wars vehicle. I mean, of course, there's a Millennium Falcon, but if I had a 1/6 scale Millennium Falcon, it would completely fill the garage, a two-car garage. So I have a Millennium Falcon cockpit, 1/6 scale, but the X-Wing will be full, the whole thing. And the most emotional moment in Star Wars came from the arrival of an X-Wing in the last episode of Mandalorian season 2, where I actually teared up by seeing and thinking, is it Luke? And then it was, it was so powerful. And anyway, so there's that. And then some Ralph McQuarrie armor, if you know who he was.
Mm-hmm.
So much of the look of Star Wars originated from Ralph McQuarrie. So I just finished Ralph McQuarrie Boba Fett concept helmet and the original Darth Vader design, which I wish they'd stuck with. It's so scary looking. It has kind of an insect kind of vibe to it. But first illustration I ever saw of Star Wars after the actual poster at the movie theater was the cover for a Portfolio. And the image is actually pretty famous. You see Darth Vader in a lightsaber duel with Luke Skywalker, but Luke looks like he's wearing like a scuba mask, and the back is to him, which is funny because they never meet. Of course, they fight over the Death Star, but that battle between Luke and Darth doesn't happen until Empire Strikes Back. But so many of Ralph McQuarrie's images ended up much later, like the giant snow spiders in The Mandalorian. Those are Ralph McQuarrie designs. So anyway, that I'm working on full-size armor for those two things, and then the X-Wing. I just finished a IG-12 where Grogu drives it, and yes, no.
And I saw that. What was the Enforcer droid? I love the design for those Enforcer droids. You did one of those too.
Yeah, the KX Enforcer. Oh man, both of those make quite an impact if you come into the house. It's the way they light up and everything. And it's how I break away from the drawing table. I can't just sit, and so I break away, and we either Laura and I either run to the gym or I go and make something, and that's kind of our daily life.
I was listening to one of your albums from the Gear on the way back from a dentist appointment on the way here, actually. And for a person who's always been pretty prolific in comics, it seems like you kind of always cut out spaces for yourself. Is that important to you to have something like an outlet, like building an X-Wing or, doing an album with the Gear or things like that, where you can express yourself creatively, but not just in a comic way like your job?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always been like that. My dad was very much a Renaissance man. He tried to do anything and everything. He had lost his left hand mysteriously. He knows how he lost it. But he always had different stories, like a propeller cut it off or a shark bit it off or an explosion. Every time he would tackle a hobby, he would go all in: scuba diving, parachuting, gliders. He built 2 open cockpit biplanes in our basement. So he was always downstairs, welding and stuff. And so obviously he was a pilot, taught us kids how to fly when we'd take our friends up for flights on our birthdays. And he built a dark room in the basement. I don't know if it was the loss of his hand that made him feel like he had to prove that he wasn't disabled in any way. It was so weird because whenever a new friend would come over, they would then, whisper to me, "Hey, how did your dad lose his hand. And I never noticed that he was missing his hand until somebody would say something, because he was just on the go. And of course, he had a drafting table in the house. Art supplies were at our fingertips constantly. And my mom as well, she would always have us doing different things, building marionettes or ceramics, or there was always something being made or done. And so that's just kind of like how it's been. And then making comic books was just another thing I was doing for fun. I had a career as a TV reporter. And in fact, the last story I ever covered was the fall of the Berlin Wall. But my hobby started paying better, or at least well enough. I got this contract for a 12-issue series called Jaguar Stories. And that was all it took for me to ask Laura, can we make a go of this? And she was fully supportive of it. And we pulled up stakes in Europe, moved back to the States, Oregon, where I was born. Then turns out the reason I was offered this incredible page rate was because the man that had bought Kimiko, who was the publisher, was building assets for chapter 11. So once we got back to the States, I think I got 3 more paychecks, and then he filed chapter 11, and we were sunk. And Laura got a job at a jewelry store, and why she's the greatest hero in my life. She was the breadwinner while we scrambled. And I could have gone back to broadcasting and tried to get a job in broadcasting, but she was completely supportive of me really fully committing to making comic books for a living. And Matt Wagner, who reached out while we were still in Europe, ended up moving to Oregon. He was also caught up in that chapter 11. Kimiko had Grendel and Mage. So he was trapped in that as well. And so we bonded over that, among other things. And he introduced Neil Gaiman to my work. Neil, he offered me Sandman. So anyway, this is where just so many wonderful, wonderful things happened. I fell in love with the industry and the people who work in the industry because of that kind of generosity and the way, if somebody enjoys your work, the way they promote it. Like Matt would talk up my work as if it was his, that the kind of passion he had, and I benefited from it, infinitely. And then Neil and that's just those early examples of everyone throughout. If you look at my Madman work, like over 200 different artists have done pinups, their versions of Madman. So I made the right choice. I love this medium so much. I love this industry so much. I love my fellow artists and writers so much. It's just blessing upon blessing.
So I know you mentioned the television reporting, but you also were a radio host for a time, from what I understand. Were comics kind of always your passion in the background, like the thing that you really wanted, but you just didn't necessarily know if you could make work while you were doing those things?
I apologize for anybody that has to hear this story again, so I'll tell it as quickly as possible. But my earliest clear memory is waking up in a hospital bed, which was blanketed with comic books. Turns out my older brother, Lee, I wouldn't know what a comic book was if it wasn't for him, but he knocked me off a table and I landed on my head, got a concussion, and woke up in the hospital. And he talked mom and dad into buying a bunch of comics. And so that's, again, my first clear defined memory in my life is waking up blanketed in comic books. And Lee and I drew our own comics. It was always just for fun. They were just always there. And I'm so grateful that Lee, he's literally a genius. He's just a brilliant human being. And even as a child, bought the best comic books. Anytime we'd go on any kind of trip or go on a picnic or anything, we'd always stop in and hit the spinner rack. And so we'd be entertained in the back seat whenever we were going somewhere. And I would buy like Harvey comics, like Hot Stuff and Richie Rich and Casper. And then I would see what Lee had, and he had the Legion of Superheroes and all the great, Ditko, Kirby, Marvel books, and he had all the best stuff. So he would have Daredevil, and so I can quickly go through my thing. And we both learned how to read from comic books because we wanted to know what the characters were saying, and it was always his stuff that stuck with me. There were some great cartoonists that worked with Harvey. That's one of the reasons why I love a nice brush line, because there's some really great brushwork in those comics. But the intellect and depth that was always in Lee's stuff always stuck with me. And then our family dissolved. My mom moved away, and Lee, being the oldest, and our younger brother Curtis being just a baby, Lee felt obligated to go with mom. I stayed with dad. Then I had kind of a courtship of Betty's father life, if anybody knows what that old TV series was, but it was like me and dad. And my comic book hobby was ingrained, and would regularly keep up on my favorite comics. And my absolute favorite comic was, The Amazing Spider-Man, until they killed off Gwen Stacy, who I had a crazy crush on. Cold turkey. I stopped buying comics entirely. It really destroyed me.
Wow.
It's no joke. It traumatized me. I couldn't believe that they could kill off a character like that. Now, her father had been killed off previously, and that was hard, but then it was too soon. and the way it was done, where you think he saved her as she's falling up a bridge, the Green Goblin, then you see her neck, there's a snap, and she's dead. I couldn't believe it. And it was like, no, I'm done. So I stopped buying comic books entirely. Then I had a newspaper route, and I was spending all my money on record albums at that point. And so I would draw my record album covers, and I continued to draw and sculpt. My art teacher in junior high helped me select my own projects. And so I had this easel and all this stuff in the corner, and he just kind of let me go beyond what the regular assignments were. So I'm forever grateful for that. At one point I built a giant Tarkus. It's kind of a armadillo with tank treads. It's an album cover from Emerson, Lake and Palmer. So with chicken wire and paper mache, I built this giant Tarkus that you could sit on.
That's amazing.
That was one of my art assignments. So it was just a constant thing, always creating something, always building something, always learning new techniques, always learning, what tools to use, and sculpting. So I would do head busts. I did dozens of life-size head busts of different movie characters. And do you know who Max Headroom was?
Oh, yeah.
I did everything from Max Headroom to Henry from Eraserhead. I did David Letterman head bust, Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, Mick Jagger, Adam West Batman. Later, Alex Russ told me he was obsessed with finding it. I traded this Adam West bust to Pikes Peak's Books and Comics in Colorado Springs. I was teaching television production at the Air Force Academy there. So I kind of jumped ahead. But when I moved to Colorado Springs, I met a guy named Charlie Custis. And I've always been a big movie fan. Love movies. I'm just obsessed with movies. And we'd go to the movies together. We were on a security detail, and then became friends, and would go to the movies. And he had this amazing comic book collection, and he was very organized. If you went into his house, he had his comics laid out better than the comic book shops in Colorado. Between Colorado Springs and Denver, they had great comic book stores. And so he's constantly, he would see me drawing and painting and sculpting. And I wrote a screenplay called Dead Air and started to storyboard it. And so he'd no, make it a comic book. And he was trying to, if you're going to draw it, turn it into a comic book. And then he introduced me to Steve Siegel. His father had the same job that I currently had at the Air Force Academy at the TV studio. We would teach cadets how to put on their own news program, and we taught them everything: audio, switcher, floor cameras, remote cameras, everything, lighting. And so Steve's dad had the same exact job I had. So when we met, we had that to talk about. And then he had just had his first comic book release called Kafka. And anyway, these guys dumped all of these comic books on me. And to know exactly the date, there were 2 more issues of Watchmen to come out.
Oh, wow. So quite the time.
And so, of course, they gave me Watchmen, they gave me Dark Knight Returns, and they gave me, and the Frank Miller Daredevils. All this stuff just really lit me up. And then what really knocked my socks off was they gave me first 4 issues of Mr. X, which was by the Hernandez brothers. And it was really colorful, and you'd open it up and it had a double spread credits page, which was very cinematic, the way it was kind of went widescreen. And most comics would have a black and white inside cover. Indie comics would. But anyway, Steve Siegel said, if you like Mr. X, you will love Love and Rockets. And so he turned me on to Love and Rockets, and that changed my world. It just blew my mind, because here were these brothers, initially 3, Mario, Jaime, and Beto Gilbert. And they did whatever they wanted between the covers of Love and Rockets. So it was like their own umbrella title, their own anthology book, and would tell any kind of story they wanted with robots and dinosaurs and all, just crazy cool, no rules, and gorgeous. It's beautiful writing and an amazing artwork. And it just showed me you could do anything. There were no rules. You didn't have to work for a major publisher if you didn't want to. Or if you did want to, this was a great training ground to just cut loose and do what you wanted. So I created my own umbrella title called Graphique Musique. This is when we were still in Europe. And then when we moved back to the States, started it over as Graphic Music, a phonetic spelling. Then from there, my kids were bringing their friends home. I was doing all this very esoteric stuff. And when they were showing their friends what I did, they scratched their heads, because this wasn't kid stuff. And then looking through the eyes of my sons, our daughter Kelby wasn't born yet, but I remembered what I felt when I was their age. And I wanted to go back to those stories that the ones that Lee always had. So I took my favorite creation at the time, Frank Einstein, and put a costume on him. And that became Madman. Kevin Eastman, who co-created the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, had a kind of a hobby publishing. I would call it a hobby because he only did it for a few years. But fortunately, right place, right time, he saw what I was doing, published it, through so much support behind it. It was successful, and that opened even more doors. So not knowing how to get work at Marvel and DC, they noticed me and reached out to me. And so I started getting gigs.
Yeah.
Like one of the first things that I did with Marvel was Kurt Busiek wrote The Untold Tales of Spider-Man, and I did the first annual. And Joe Sinnott inked me.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's funny. I think a lot of times when people think of influences, they're just like, oh, different artists and stuff like that. One of the things I think is interesting about listening to you talk about all this is, while it's not in the same way we think about it, it seems like some of the biggest influences in your life were actually like Lee and Steve Siegel handing you a bunch of comics, and your kids like kind of pushing you in a different direction.
Yeah, and Charlie Custis.
Yeah. And I think that's interesting, because I think obviously the people in our lives are a central part of our stories and how we become the people we are. But it seems like all of those people, they're not Los Bros Hernandez. They're not like, Beto, and they're not like Mario and, and Jaime. They're not like kind of people we would traditionally think of as an influence, but they influenced you in a real way that is impossible to quantify, it seems.
Yeah. If not for Lee, and certainly my dad, who we never had to look for paper. We never had to look for colored pencils. I don't even know. I'm trying to think when I think the first time if not for Lee, the first time I would have been introduced to comics would have been at a school fair, where I remember it was really thrilling. You would buy tickets, you'd go into the gym, and they had all these different rides and stuff, rides in quotation marks. But one of the best things was this fishing thing, where you would throw your line over a wall, and then somebody on the other side would hook something on there, and you'd pull it back and you'd get a prize. And I got a bundle of comics. They were all curled up and tied together. And I remember the Mad Mod Teen Titans issue was one of them. And that was my introduction to Teen Titans. And then luckily there was a secondhand store just downtown. And we lived just above Roseburg, Oregon's classic Americana downtown street. Like we could walk, I think 3 blocks off the hill, and we're in this Norman Rockwell downtown. There's the toy store, there's the drug store, there's the music store, just classic Americana. And then there was a secondhand store. And that's where I got Brave and the Bold that had the very first appearance of Teen Titans. And then also Doom Patrol. So Bruno Premiani is one of my biggest influences. The two biggest influences that most people have never heard of in general, like I'm sure you've heard of Bruno Premiani, it would be Bruno Premiani and Roy Crane. Alex Toth used to be somebody that most people had never heard of. Now his reputation has grown. Fantagraphics did those big, beautiful Captain Easy, Sunday Funny collections. So a lot of my influences have become more well known. Oh man, I'm so happy to be living when I'm living, because almost everything is available now in a collection.
Yeah.
And when my career started, I was like getting photocopies from other artists. Like most of my Alex Toth collection were stacks of photocopies that other artists had copied. So they're copies of copies of copies. And it was the same with Roy Crane. Like I fell in love with Roy Crane through Xerox copies. And then most of his stuff has been collected now. And I just love his stuff so much. Jack Cole, the creator of Plastic Man. And then, of course, the EC artists like Bernie Krigstein and Johnny Craig. The EC stuff, those were the first super cool collections that I ever got. The big, giant, hardcover, black and white in slipcases. So it was almost like owning the original art.
Yeah.
In black and white. You can really get in there and see the line art and see what differentiated the different artists. Frank Frazetta was in there. I love Frank Frazetta's cartooning more than I do his paintings. And I love his paintings. But I love his ink line and his storytelling. If he wasn't so successful with paintings, he maybe would have done more comics. And boy, I love his comics. I eat that stuff up.
I have Madman Gargantua next to me, and I just like looking at the table of contents and just like talking about the pinups in there. It's absolutely insane. I mean, like,
it is.
I mean, looking at like the first three names are Kirby, Frazetta, and Toth, and then like Barry Windsor Smith. I see all the Conan behind you, and
oh, man.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I wanted to bring this up because one of the things I think is interesting about your work is like we talked about the Star Wars stuff that manifests itself in you creatively, maybe not in the comics, but in you creatively. You talked about Emerson, Lake and Palmer. That's like something that made you want to create art. Obviously, David Bowie is a great example, whether it's showing up in the Bowie graphic novel you did or Madman or whatever. Looking behind you, it's clear that you have passions. How crucial are the things you're passionate about to you as a storyteller and as an artist?
It's interwoven. It's there. It's the DNA. I could walk through any issue of Madman and show you this song influenced that, this record album cover influenced that. It'd be the kind of thing that wouldn't be recognizable, but is there. Bowie, there's no other musical entity. The Beatles would be close, but there's something about Bowie's music and lyrics that fill my head with imagery. Almost all music fills my head with imagery, but there's something about Bowie's music that it's like a drug. Like I'll trip out on it and just see things and will inspire stories. And so I will have a whole story in front of me just because of one line of a lyric. And you wouldn't be able to know that lyric inspired that story. It's because it's not an obviously direct thing. It's like if, Bungalow Bill, the Beatles, I could illustrate that story. And if I illustrated Bungalow Bill, you would go, oh, this is Bungalow Bill. With Bowie, it's more abstract. So you wouldn't directly know it. There's so many examples. It makes my head swim. But it's like that with film too, and certain television shows. Like I've got a diorama of The Prisoner behind me. It was this 17 episode British television series from the late 60s, which I didn't see in full until probably about 10 years ago. But I had nightmares about it. There's this big white ball called a rover that if you try to escape this island in The Prisoner, it will go after you. And in the first episode, it goes after a guy and smothers him. Like you see his face pressed up against inside this white sphere. I had nightmares about that. So it wasn't until about 10, maybe 15 years ago that I found all of the episodes at the library or something. It was like, there was a DVD set of it. And I'm watching this. It was a revelation. It was an epiphany. My parents must have saw this. I must have saw it, and it stuck with me. And I didn't realize I'd seen it until as an adult.
Yeah.
I saw it. And then beyond that emotional impact, actually watching and absorbing the entire series, it's become one of my favorite creative entities ever. And it was filmed in some rich guy bought this land in Wales and wanted to recreate southern Italy. So he created this replica of Italy in Wales. And Patrick McGoohan, who is the star of a TV series called Secret Agent, Secret Agent, man. In fact, I think it's the first episode. They went to Port Merion, Wales to use, and he fell in love with this village, this weird village, and it stuck with him. So after the monstrous success of Secret Agent and Danger Man was actually before Secret Agent. I think he was the highest paid actor on television at that time in England, and was inspired to create The Prisoner, and went back to Port Merion using this village for the jail, for this island. And he's called Number 6. And through the whole 17 episodes, you're trying to understand why he's there, what they want from him, and everybody's a number. But that has inspired stories. But it's always a thread. It's never an outright obvious literal adaptation of something. It's always something that it's a little seed that grows in my head. And so with Madman, I've got this outline of story ideas that I will never live long enough to tell them all. And especially since I've fallen in love with collaborations. So it's harder and harder to get back to doing my Madman stories, because I get a call from Mark Russell. Hey, want to do Superman?
Yeah.
Or Dan Slott. Hey, you want to do Silver Surfer? Or Matt Fraction want to do FF? And it's like, absolutely, yes, please. And then my brother Lee, we did one of my absolute favorite things I've ever done was this bug series for Gerard Way's Young Animal imprint. So it just gets harder and harder to get back to Madman, because I've got all of these other wonderful opportunities that I'm playing with. The Bowie book, for instance, and now I'm a third of the way through another musical graphic novel with my bestie, Ben Saunders. So I can't say what that is yet, but it's a third of the way done, and like all colored, and I've hand lettered it, and it's just juggling. And somehow I think I've become kind of an efficiency expert, because when I get up, there's stuff to do. So like I told you today, got to do a dump run, got to, bring out our giant skeleton for the front of the house. And
one like the giant, like 24-foot ones or whatever it is.
No, this one is, I think he's 9 feet.
Okay. Yeah.
But he talks and his eyes blink.
Oh my God.
We call him Scully. And then we have a life-sized Martian from Mars Attacks.
Oh, awesome.
And it goes, woo! his gun fog comes out of it. Like there's a laser that lights up the fog. Anyway, Halloween is our favorite holiday. We're crazy with. We have the biggest blowout Halloween party.
My wife and I were talking about getting ours set up. We always do like a graveyard, and she puts up like a mummified body up in the trees and all this stuff like that. Yeah. And so we go all out. And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Warning, warning, warning. You have been reported by Oni Press for possession of Skin Police #1, the visceral and violent vision of 22nd century hyperaction, coming to comic shops this October. In the year 2142, fertility levels will plummet, illegal clones will become a thriving underground black market for desperate families, but unbeknownst to everyone, 3 in 4 of these genetic duplicates will degenerate into psychologically unstable killing machines at some point in the life cycle. Whoops! Fortunately, the United States of Europe has decided to take up the unenviable task of hunting these human time bombs before it's too late. To the government, they're the Duplicate Identification and Capture Division. To everyone else, they're the Skin Police. The worst part of the job? It's always the one you least suspect. From rising stars Jordan Thomas and Daniel Geet comes the page-turning science fiction spectacle of 2024. Skin Police #1 in comic shops everywhere this October. And now, back to the show. I read about the fact that you had all that Madman kind of built up. Would you say that, especially at this point for you as a creator, that time is like the biggest restricting factor for you being able to do all the things you want to do?
Always. Always. I mean, we have a third gear album. We've got over 20 tracks, but we never have the time because I grew my own Partridge Family. The gear is me, my two sons, and my daughter-in-law, and she's our bass player. And we found it impossible to get together to finish mixing these tracks. And everybody's got stuff going on. They've got my disease where they're just doing 100 different things at the same time. And yeah, the time is, it's impossible. So because anytime somebody else is involved, I have to put them at the top of the priority list. So if it's a collaboration, like most recently with Batman and Superman with Mark Russell, I'm not going to drop the ball with Mark,
Right.
Now with Matt Fraction and Patton Oswalt, I got to make sure I fulfill that commitment. The music book with Ben Saunders, that's a spare time kind of thing. And I see Ben at least once a week. By the way, he teaches a course of comic books at the University of Oregon. And he's also an English professor. So he teaches Shakespeare. And he's from Wales, coincidentally.
Oh.
We were just talking about Wales. He has curated the best exhibits ever. He did an EC exhibit at the University of Oregon. He did a history of the superhero at the University of Oregon. And so this company reached out to him to curate the Traveling Marvel exhibit, which has been going around the world. It started out at, I think it's been the Space Needle in Seattle. Yeah, it's been all over, and it's still going. So if anybody gets, I think it's in Europe now, but if you haven't seen it and you get the chance to see it, it's amazing. There's all kinds of interactive stuff, but that's Professor Benjamin Saunders. And so this music book, passion project for us, and fortunately it's a spare time thing. And I'm amazed they've gotten a third of it complete, and Laura has colored the first third of it. But if it had a release schedule, I would, out of respect to Ben, I'd have to make sure that I didn't take any other projects or anything to get it done. That's what happens.
So you said you're addicted to collaboration and you have all those pages for Madman, but like the collaboration, obviously for the reasons you just said, it takes precedent.
Hearing it back, addicted isn't the right word, but definitely obsessed maybe.
What is it about that speaks to you so much? Is it about the fact that there's somebody else contributing that's bringing kind of, I don't know if mysterious factor, like something that's not just you? Is that what it is?
Yes. Well, not only that, but also the quality of the people I've been able to work with. They're the best.
Yeah.
If you look at all of the people I've worked with the best writers in the business, and I've learned so much from each of them. So when I get to create with that level of talent and learn, it's amazing how different each writer writes a comic book script.
Mm-hmm.
Like Neil Gaiman writes his, like it's like a correspondence. It's like a letter. He's actually talking to me in the script. So, oh, Michael, I think on this page, if we did this, it's like he's talking to me. With Dan Slott, with the beginning of every issue, he knows that I wake up at noon. I have an alarm that so I work through the night. And then I keep vampire hours, but then I wake up at noon and I get a little bit of daylight and some time with, all of our kids live within walking distance of us. And so there's a lot of interaction with family. And then by the time everybody else winds down, I have the whole night to just be in my own headspace. So with Dan, he would call me and it'd be story time. So I'm lying in bed and Dan is telling me the story and I'm laughing and responding and like, well, what if we did this? But I feel like a little kid, at the library and listening to the storyteller, it's just amazing. He's telling me the whole story. And then so we have that back and forth. And then when I get the script, I'm already familiar with it. I already know the images are always in my head. And the things that change are easily adjusted, and on and on. Like Gerard Way has a very dense, at least for me, the Doom Patrol issue we did together. My gosh, it was it. I don't want to exaggerate, but I think it was about 40 pages for a 20-page script. There was so much detail in it, so there were choices. They're all different. Everybody has their own stamp on it. And then when I write for myself, I can keep an outline because it's all in my head. So it's all very different. And each time I work with somebody else, I grow as a storyteller myself. And with Mark Russell, he's a fellow Oregonian. So we get to hang out. We get to walk and talk. Same with Matt Fraction. He's an Oregonian too. So there's a lot of FaceTime if needed.
I do think it's interesting. So you have Matt Fraction, you did FF, which I do want to say one of my favorite random sequences from any comic ever was the dance sequence you did with She-Hulk and White Wingfoot in that.
Oh, thanks.
It's such a good sequence, but you have that, and then you have the Minor Threats book coming up, or one shot you have coming up. You have Peter Milligan. Peter Milligan is somebody that you've worked with a lot over the years, maybe in some ways more than anyone else that isn't your brother, probably.
It'd be between him and Dan.
Yeah. And then you also have Mark Russell, who you've collaborated with on a couple projects. Is this what the average collaboration is like with you? Or do you find that there's certain ones where it fits like a glove from the start?
I've asked myself that question a lot, actually. I like, am I just the luckiest person on the planet? Or do I adjust well? Do I play well with others? Because it's all been, I've only struggled with 2 collaborations ever, and they were brief, and I was able to work around it. But all my long-term collaborations have been dreams. They just flowed. Like working with Mark Russell is so easy. It just feels so natural. And with all of them, Fraction is just one of the sweetest human beings. And with Peter, oh my gosh, we created Marvel Mutants, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Our Build X-Force, Kill X-Force is in Deadpool 2. Pinch me. Yeah, it's just crazy. And because of that, so many blessings, so many opportunities, so many rewards, access awards, financial rewards, and it's all just pleasure. I like knowing that today I will have created something that didn't exist yesterday. And every day is like that. Just pinch me.
I want to ask about a couple creations. We can't get too deep into it because we do need to talk about the art book, but these are 2 random ones.
Oh yeah.
I'm going to start with the art book, or with the random one. What's the story behind Doop? How did that character come together?
Doop. One of the few times I reached out first came back tenfold. And so Joe Quesada and I came into the industry about the same time. Me and Indy, him and mainstream comics. So 2 very different levels of success and pathways. He ends up editor-in-chief at Marvel. And I read an article with him, an interview with him, where he was discussing his intentions. And if you remember, Marvel wasn't doing that well back then.
Right.
And Joe, the way he was kind of given the reins, it sounded like there was going to be a big party at Marvel. And so I called him up and was like, Joe, I want to go to your party. This sounds like fun. And he's like, yeah, absolutely. Let me get something going. And so the next day I got calls from Tom Brevoort and Axel Alonso, and they had ideas for me. And Axel had already been talking to Peter about starting X-Force from scratch. And they just discussed it, and he was like, and I'd done a short Shade the Changing Man story with Peter, and huge fan. He did a strip called Freakwave with Brendan McCarthy. So, there's like early stuff of his that I was a huge fan of before he was doing Shade the Changing Man and things that he became well known for. So when Axel said, how'd you like to work with Peter on this? It was, yes, please. And I've worked with Tom Brevoort since. In fact, he was the editor on Silver Surfer. But with him, it was like, what would you be interested in? And with Axel, it was like, here's this. So it was a real easy yes. It was so defined. And one of the first things Axel said was, how'd you like to create some Marvel Mutants? So yes, please, and thank you. And I think it was either that phone call or the next phone call after I'd said, yeah, I absolutely want to do this, that on the phone, it was a really long phone call because I doodled at least 24 characters. Most of those doodles have been published in, there have been a couple of X-Force Ecstatics omnibuses. Mm-hmm. And I'm pretty sure it's in one or both of those. And so I'm just designing characters and suggesting names. And I doodled this flying potato and with the word balloon, and it just says Doop. I don't know why I thought of Doop, but it's kind of like a dope de do or a doodle a doo, but it just Doop exclamation mark. And I think I faxed it to Axel, the doodles. Like, I've got a bunch of ideas here. Get these to Peter, and talking with Peter on the phone and Axel on the phone. And so show me which ones you like. What would you be interested in? What works? What doesn't? What direction do we want to go? And so I got a call back from Axel that says, "Oh man, we like this, but I don't, but not Doop." That, and I was like, "Oh, and like he was, for me, it was like, I'm just, this is stream of consciousness. Please don't worry about me being offended if you don't like any of these. I'm just flowing here." But initially rejected it. But then he pinned up the sheet in the hallways at Marvel. And Axel calls me back and says, "Okay, I think I need to rethink this Doop thing." And I was like, "What do you mean?" He says, "Everybody's running up and down the halls yelling Doop." So I was like, "I think you might have something there." And then Peter got the idea, okay, let's make him the most powerful character in the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I can get behind that. The way he can like create a universe inside himself and turn himself inside out. And so that was Peter's idea. Yeah, the rest is history.
A group of podcasts was going to do an X-Men centric, basically, like, we're going to group together. Everyone takes a different X-Men character. And they asked me if I wanted to participate. And I was like, it's not really my kind of thing. And then I was like, wait, what if I interviewed Mike Allred and I talked to Peter Milligan about how Doop came together? So I asked them, I was like, is Doop taken? And they were like, no, Doop is not taken. They're like, isn't everybody going to take Cyclops and Wolverine? I'm like, is Doop taken? I love Doop. Doop's amazing. But last question before we get into the art book. Madman was the first time I discovered your work. That and Jeff Smith's Bone were the first comics outside of superhero comics I discovered when I was a kid. In fact, I was probably the only kid in Anchorage, Alaska who knew what the word Ginchi meant because of Madman. The thing that's interesting about it, I know you haven't really done a Madman story since 2009. There was It Girl and the Atomics that came afterwards from Jamie S. Rich and Mike Norton, but that wasn't your baby, or that wasn't your thing entirely. You always are thinking of stories about it. Why do you think Madman has always been like a home base for you as a creator, like something that you just can't help but think about and come back to?
Well, first of all, Jamie S. Rich is one of my very, very best friends. I've also been blessed with editors, Diana Schutz and Shelley Bond, just wonderful, wonderful editors. So when he had an idea for an It Girl series, it was the easiest thing in the world to just say, do whatever you want, and hand it over to him and Mike. Yeah. So that's why that existed. But with Madman, like I said, when I wanted to do something my kids would like that worked on both levels, that a costumed adventurer that could interact with every pop pastiche, robots, mad scientists, aliens, time travel. That was the initial formula. Also stirred in my favorite characters like Jack Cole's Plastic Man, Alex Toth's The Fox, Daredevil, Will Eisner's The Spirit. So it just stirred that all up. And that was initially the idea, to have this classic costumed adventurer character. But beyond that level that a child would enjoy was my obsession with existentialism that I found filtering into it. So there was this whole other level of intellectualism that was in there that created more depth beyond a simple adventure comic. And somebody then asked me, is he you? Because the things that Frank's talking about and thinking about and concerned with are the things that I am. And so subconsciously, I was existing through Frank Einstein, Madman. And then I realized, wow, he is my filter into this world. He is me. And Joe, his girlfriend, is Laura. And so for me, I wanted these characters to have an ideal romance, an ideal love story. And that's what Laura and I have been blessed with. And so it happened organically, naturally, subconsciously. And then eventually I had to acknowledge that, yes, this is that's my safe space. That's where I can be as intimate as I want to be, but in this wacky doodle world where anything can happen, and does. So that's why it's my home. That's why it's always there for me. It's weird to think how many years have passed since I did a full-on series, or I've done a special here and a special there, because it's always a part of me. I'm always thinking about it, but my time is filled with these other things.
And now, a quick word from one of our sponsors. Zoop is where some of the biggest names in comics are crowdfunding. Live campaigns include Switchblade Shorties, the final work from the late Ed Piskor, new publisher Panic Entertainment's Sampler Pack, master painter Dave Dorman's first published art book in over 10 years, as well as campaigns from Joseph Siraki and Kelly Williams, Danny Hellman, World at War's Tommy Holes, and more. More campaigns are coming soon to Zoop from Joe Quesada, Camilla D'Erico, Alex Segura, Michael Marizzi, Dean Kotz, the Megaton Man Omnibus from Don Simpson and Fantagraphics, and others continually being announced. Zoop would like to thank all the creators who have recently submitted projects and urge more creators to submit your project to Zoop. Click the Submit Your Project link at zoop.gg, as they are providing services to even more creators than ever before. And now, back to the show. Well, one of the things it's filled with is the Marvel art of Michael Allred, your soon-to-be-Kickstarted art book that's, and I quote, 200 pages of your best comic art from over 2 decades of Marvel Comics. It's an oversized art book, or a high-end coffee table book, as the one description of it said, from Clover Press. How did that project come together for you? Was that something Clover pitched you on, or how did that all come together?
Chris Stevens, I've done a couple things for him. First thing being this big, gigantic Winston McKay, Little Nemo and Slumber, which I homaged through Madman. So my piece for Little Nemo is a Madman piece. And it's one of my favorite one-pagers ever. Even recreated it for our 3D special. So Christian LeBlanc, who has converted lots and lots of my stuff into 3D, did that piece for me. So that was a joy. And so when I hear from Chris Stevens about, hey, how would you like this big fancy schmancy book collecting a lot of your Marvel stuff, I'd be like, okay. Yeah, it's pretty great. And it just keeps growing. Like, there's all kinds of nifty, I guess they're called stretch goals. I'm not exactly sure how this stuff works, but David Mack is a good friend, and I'm holding his that he did, and everything from the binding, the paper, it's just gorgeous. And then, of course, the slip cases, the fold outs, the reversible poster dust jackets. There's a sticker set, a card set, maybe a color form set.
There's a puzzle.
Yep. Yeah. It just keeps there. Like, how about this? How about this? So, and of course, the portfolio, the giant prints. Yeah, this is awesome. It's just freaking awesome.
So it was just kind of an easy yes, because the production just seems like it's so well done. It was kind of up your alley.
Yeah. And there's a lot of stuff which either hasn't been seen or is little seen. There's stuff that I did for that Traveling Marvel exhibit that was just used in-house. Mm-hmm. There was promo stuff that was used in-house for the What Up series on Disney Plus. So stuff that's been seen but not widely seen. Mm-hmm. And then there's stuff that hasn't been seen at all. So a lot of stuff that I'm really fond of that I'm happy to see collected in this big, beautiful book, but also stuff that I really love that a lot of people have never had the opportunity to see. I'm getting better at social media stuff. So I'm doing more and more with Instagram, and I think I've posted a lot of stuff that's unpublished on my Instagram page, Allred MD, but not in print.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny that when I was first emailed about this, like when I first learned about this project, there was a part of me that was a little surprised because I didn't think of you as a Marvel artist by nature. And I think it's just because in my brain, I just think of you. I think of you and then I think of Madman. And it's like those two things are so connected. But then when I actually looked at it, the combined X-Force and X-Stacks is your longest run on any non-Madman title, followed by Silver Surfer, iZombie, and then FF. So apparently I just had no idea what I was talking about. But I am curious as to, you said that there's some unpublished stuff in there. There's obviously going to be stuff from a lot of those projects as well. What was the process for figuring out what art to include and what not to include? Because I imagine page count became a challenging factor at a certain point.
I'm equally fond of most of everything I've done. So I'm heavily leaning on Chris to pick the pieces that he likes. And then when I see what he's picking, I'm able to create tiers, a tier system.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, I've done tons of commissions. So Simon Miller at gotsuperpowers.com keeps a list of commission requests for me, and lots and lots of people have asked for Marvel stuff. So that's a lot of that stuff's in there that has never been seen, never been published, because it's only been seen by the people that bought them. And a lot of them have been colored. People have requested color prints from Laura, and a lot of them are just in black and white. But yeah, there's a lot of that stuff.
That's interesting. I hadn't even considered that. I figured it would be largely finished art. Is there any process stuff in it, or is it just going to be mostly finished art?
Mostly finished art. My process stuff, I haven't been good about recording it.
Yeah.
Keeping track of it. I use a really hard lead clicker pencil. If you see my originals, they're very, very clean. I don't know why I became obsessed with having clean artwork. I think somebody made a comment early on about you can see all the fingerprints or something, like somebody made some kind of crack. And also, since I ink my own stuff, I don't want to do it twice.
Right.
So my pencils are just enough for me to know where to put the line.
Mm-hmm.
And then I fill out from there. So my pencils are very minimal, very and because I use this hard lead, it's, unless I turn up the adjustments, you can barely see them in a scan.
Wow.
And also this whole efficiency expert thing. I don't want Laura to have to scan stuff twice. And also, it's weird. I rarely even turn in pencils. Most of my editors trust me to just turn in finished inked pages, because everybody just wants the stuff as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
I get just enough on the page to where I'm comfortable to start inking it, and then most of the work is in the ink. And also my thumbnails, I do thumbnail on the scripts. It's like you don't even know what you're looking at. It's like shorthand. It's where I lay down my compositions. I know that this figure is going to be closer, so there'll be a circle that's bigger than the figures in the back, which would be smaller circles. And then they're just super they're literally thumbnails. They're the size. I draw them right on the script pages. And not much in the way of process for me.
Well, it seems like kind of the only, for you, your thumbnails and your pencils are useful. But for us as outsiders, it seems like the most decipherable, the most like consumable steps are inks and colors, like the finished versions of the pieces.
Yeah. Yeah, we did do a lot of my pencils in the Bowie graphic novel. I was hand lettering that, and Nate Pecos is my favorite letterer. I've been blessed to work with Todd Klein. Like you were talking, like some people don't see me as a Marvel artist. Some people don't see me as a DC artist. Some people see me as a Vertigo artist.
Yeah.
And some people think of me as an indie artist. Every time I do a different project for a different publisher, it expands my audience. I'm constantly being reintroduced to new people, because a lot of people, to this day, it surprises me that somebody only buys Marvel comics. They only buy DC comics. They only buy indie comics. And so it's good to play in every sandbox that you can. And there's always stuff that interests me in every sandbox. So I'm happy to spread myself around and do that. And with the Bowie book and hand lettering it, I wanted to do that because in my head, I have the image. So if I letter it first, I'm able to integrate the balloons into the art. So there's no wasted art. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So nowadays, you'll have the lettering produced digitally. So I'm trying to guess how much space the lettering will take when I'm drawing Batman, for instance, this Batman series. And then hoping the letterer sees that I left this space there,
Yeah.
but I might misjudge it, and part of their head gets covered, part of their this figure, which I spent X amount of time drawing, chunk of it gets covered by a caption or a word balloon. So that was really liberating to hand letter it and then have all of that other space to compose perfectly in that space that's left after the lettering, and the lettering becomes part of the artwork. So I spent way more time locking down everything on that, and also because I was dealing with likenesses.
Yeah.
So I couldn't just do my loosey goosey hard pencil, and then do it all in the inks. So I really wanted to make sure I had the likeness locked in before I inked it. And so because of that, we have a record of my process with the Bowie book.
Your pencils, I have to say, look really nice in the back of that book.
Thank you.
I did want to comment on one thing you said there, though. One thing I thought was interesting when I was kind of researching for this, when I was looking around, was that it seemed apparent that some people have very defined visions as to who you are and the type of artist you could or should be. And I think it's really fascinating because, and I mean this in the most complimentary way I can, the thing I love about your work is you're undefinable. I never know when you're going to show up and what you're going to do next. And I find that to be so interesting. Like, you can do Madman, you can do Bowie, you can do Ecstatics, you can do Batman Space Age, you can do Left of the Center of the Universe, the Gear album and stuff like that. And it's interesting to think about how some people have this vision for you. And I just think that it seems like for you, you're always what interests me next. It doesn't have to be the same thing I did last time.
Yeah. I mean, I used to be very sensitive to, some people would define me as, you either hate him or love him.
Yeah.
It was like, well, why does somebody hate my work?
Yeah.
Especially like, with X-Force. I mean, of course you have what Rob did. And then all of a sudden, oh, hey, you like Rob Liefeld stuff? Well, screw you. Here's these guys.
Yeah. X-Men fans are pretty sensitive.
I understand the vitriol that came flying at us then, and it was intense. I didn't anticipate it. I wasn't prepared for it. I thought, I mean, you've got the history of Marvel Comics, and they're constantly changing artists. You're constantly, having new storylines and creative teams. And so I just thought, well, here's our turn. And the hatred that came from some corners was really incredible. And I can be a pretty sensitive person, but I had to steel myself up with that and just power on. And fortunately, there were a lot of people that loved what we were doing. And I like the artist comment, or the classic artist. I think that's probably my favorite definition, that my work is either classic or timeless.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm not following a trend, that whatever I'm working on, I find a way to make it fit the story. That's the goal. Mm-hmm. That's what I hope to achieve. With every new project, like, there'll be people who think, oh, I never thought of him as a Batman artist, but I love what he's doing with Batman. And then also because I was the cover artist for all the Adam West Batman books.
Yeah.
The crossovers, I did a cover for everything, the crossovers and everything. So to be Adam West's official cover artist was one of the greatest thrills of my life. But then I also have my Batman, the way I want to draw Batman. And I'd done it a few times, like in DC Solo and Batman Black and White. And then with what Mark and I've been doing, where we're following these characters for decades. For me, it's like, okay, we see Bruce Wayne from a child, and he's constantly, creating new ways, new technologies to make his suit more efficient. So I'm able to do these neat little tweaks through the years. And then it's not a spoiler because the issue is already out, but he loses somebody that he loves, and then the suit becomes all black. Mm-hmm. So, and for the rest of the series, he's in this morning suit, which is so appropriate for a bat, mm-hmm. a man that's trying to give the impression of being a bat. Of course, he should be all black. And I think the first time we ever saw that was in the 1989 Tim Burton movie, an all black suit. It's so obvious. With Adam West, which I love infinitely, we got this pop art. The whole idea for the Batman TV series was to get people to buy their color televisions. And same with the Monkeys TV series. It's like the more and more TV shows were being made in color, and it was color, Technicolor, in your face color. And so of course you're going to do the pop art spin with the Batman TV show. So and the it was what the comics did. We got you're putting a target on his chest, this yellow circle, so. And then getting back to the Marvel stuff, like Spider-Man, like I said, one of my favorite characters. But man, oh man, to draw Spider-Man on a regular basis, all of those webs, the math involved with the costume.
Yeah.
How many webs go down this way, and they're going down the arm, down the leg, and so web. It can be, and I love how, like, what you look at the old Steve Ditko comics, he quickly created that shortcut where if he's far enough away, you don't see the webs.
Yeah. One thing I thought was interesting when I was looking up some stuff involving your work was that I think that one of the titles you appeared in the most was Squirrel Girl. Was that, you did the title for that, didn't you?
I created the logo.
The logo, that's right. Yeah, because I did a feature on like how that whole comic came together.
That's so funny. I never drew it. I did a squirrel girl Silver Surfer pinup.
Yeah.
And that should be a book. That should be in the Marvel Art of Michael Allred book. But yeah, Tom Brevoort just called me up and like, hey, because here's something that people may not know. I've created the logo from almost everything I've done.
Yeah.
I created the FF logo. I created the Silver Surfer logo. I created the X-Force logo, the Ecstatics logo. So I like making logos. And so Tom was like, hey, want to do Squirrel Girl? Like, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the funniest thing.
Yeah, when I looked at it, I was like, I've read every issue of that comic, and I was like, is this just because you did the logo? And the answer is yes. That is super funny.
Yes. And Kevin Nolan created a lot of logos.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So you'll see, like, Kevin Nolan created the Hellboy logo.
Mm-hmm.
So Kevin Nolan has this endless connection with Hellboy.
Yeah.
They always use that logo.
That's so funny. Okay, I did want to ask, but going back to the Marvel art book, you've done a lot. You mentioned Untold Tales of Spider-Man, that annual, the first work you did. Are there projects that get kind of more shine in this? Is it pretty like Silver Surfer and X-Statics, X-Force centric?
I think it's the opposite.
Really? Kind of everything.
At least for me personally, I would rather get the variant covers in there that people had not the opportunities to get.
Right.
Maybe you saw it in the previews catalog or online somewhere, but you probably never saw it in your comic shop because there was only one copy and bang, it's gone.
Yeah.
And then if you can find one on eBay, it costs $1 zillion. For me, those are my first priority. I want the lesser known stuff. Absolutely. So of course, I've done a lot of Silver Surfer commissions. So if you like Silver Surfer, you're going to get a lot of Silver Surfer, but probably stuff you've never seen before.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of the commissions that I'm requested for are things that are my more popular things. X-Force, Ecstatics, Silver Surfer, FF. My favorite run in comics ever is the Jack Kirby run of Fantastic Four. And oh man, so many icons came out of that run. Black Panther, the Inhumans, Adam Warlock. So anyway, any opportunity I have to do the Fantastic Four, I'm there. So you're going to see a lot of Fantastic Four stuff in there that you've never seen before. So yeah, that's for me right out of the gate. So even though I told Chris, hey, I want to know what you want to see, but I want to make sure that, like my Mary Jane Vision cover, that's one of my favorite things. I'm playing with that classic Avengers Vision cover, but with Mary Jane, and I personally loved how it came out. So I want to make sure that it's in there. So it's stuff like that. I did an Avengers pinball machine cover with the Vision, or the Vision Avengers pinball machine, but Vision is the star of the pinball machine, and that's something I want people to see. Stuff like that.
Yeah. It's funny. I talked to artist Russell Datterman about Russell's version of he did Marvel art of Russell Datterman. And that was one of the things that he emphasized too, is like there's a lot of commissions, or excuse me, a lot of covers he did where it was like an incentive cover where it's like
Yeah.
you order 25 and you can get one of these, or you order 50 of these and you can get one, which means naturally not many people have those. And that was one of his focuses, is because there's so many pieces of his art that people love, but they can't actually own that piece of art.
Right.
So this book gave him a chance to share that with people.
Yeah. Well, like the Batman collection, the Superman Space Age collection, I'm so grateful when they put all of those variant covers in there. I did a Superman cover that was one of those rare ones. And, people I care about, friends of mine, like, do you have any extras? Like, oh man, my family grabbed those up right away. I don't, sorry. But there it is. And I was so happy when it got, put in the Space Age collection, because it was something that I put a lot of work in. It's just packed with detail and yeah, I want those in there. And with a lot of the Marvel variants, which will be in there, aren't part of something I've done or haven't been collected. And so if there's not a collection for it, you're not going to have the variant covers collected in there either. So a lot of this stuff that will be the first time, outside of the initial variant comic book cover.
Yeah.
In print. It's really cool how Marvel has been great about approving all this stuff. There was one thing they didn't approve, I got to say, and I want to throw this out there because it's the one thing on my wish list that a lot of people aren't aware of that I haven't been able to do yet, and that's Young Conan the Barbarian. That's one of the things I'm really passionate about. I want to do that someday. And there's the Mike Allred origin story, the blanketed with the comics. And then there's the proved dad that I didn't make a mistake, where I spent half of an entire summer's wage on 24 Conan comic books. So what you see behind me is my magic beanstalk. And that's why those Barry Windsor Smith Conans are always there. Because for me, that was the reminder for me to tell dad that quitting my broadcasting career wasn't a mistake, because those 24 comic books, which I spent $250 on over this summer as a lifeguard and was paid $500, half of that money went to 24 comic books. And when dad's looking at those comic books, they say 15 cents. 15 cents, 25 cents, because there's some giants in there. So my dad's looking at these 15, 25-cent comics, and why in the world did I spend $250 on it? So I was always proving to him that, yes, the inspiration I got from those comics and this spinner rack, which has become my magic beanstalk. And before he passed, he was able to say, you done good. You made the right decision. And with one of the layouts that I did for that work that's never been published before, is this giant wraparound, even wraparounds, on the folds on the dust jacket, you know what I mean? So it's more than just two covers. It wraps around dozens and dozens of Marvel characters running from left to right, or flying from left to right. And in there, I had Conan the Barbarian leaping. But because Marvel doesn't have the Conan license right now, they were like, maybe make room for another character. And so Conan got yanked. But other than that, Marvel has been has approved everything that we've wanted to do with this.
That's awesome. The thing that really shocks me is the fact that you actually have the commission, or like you have commissions to put in there. Like, do you scan your commissions before you send them out to people?
Oh, yeah.
Good call, you.
Well, also because even if they didn't want a color, if they didn't pay for Laura to do a color print, they might come back and change their mind. Actually, I do want to see Laura color this.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we got to have a scan of it.
Yeah.
So we're mindful of that, at least, keeping a record of everything we've done.
I read in another interview, I don't know if this is still true, that you actually would keep the entire first issues, the original art of the first issue for every comic you did for posterity, quote unquote. Do you still do that?
I do. I think Jeff Smith inspired me to do that back in the day, when in the early days, selling that original artwork was a major part of our income.
Oh, yeah.
But what would happen over time is you'd have these orphan pages. There'd be like a Madman page that didn't have Madman on it, you know? And so it would just kind of sit in the portfolio and look all lonely and, you know, why doesn't anybody want to adopt me?
Yeah.
And, you know, the orphan is growing too old. He's not cute anymore, that kind of thing. But, and so it always kind of bothered me, these orphan pages. They would eventually go because I don't have any of those early pages anymore. But at some point I realized we don't need to sell the originals to, you know, pay the bills anymore. And I love that Jeff kept all the Bone pages. And like, how did you have the presence of mind to do that? And how could you afford to do that?
Right.
Because Bone was a hit pretty fast out of the gate, you know, multiple printings and people tripping over themselves wanting to buy art from him. So I always admired that. I think Walt Simonson too. In fact, Walt bought back art that he had sold for whatever reason he wanted it. But then I realized this is something that our children could, not that they would cherish it and keep it, you know, and look at it, but it's something that they financially could benefit from as part of their inheritance. And assuming that when I leave this mortal coil, the work will be more valuable because no more stuff is coming.
Right.
So this is it. This is it. So maybe they'll benefit from even more so. And so I have to be careful when they feed me, you know, that I have a taster. I've hired somebody to taste my food to make sure I'm not poisoned.
That's a solid choice.
And people push hard. And so if I'm doing a complete issue of something, I'm keeping that cover on. I want to keep that. But from time to time, somebody will be willing to pay for an entire issue at a premium. So I'll let it go for that. But I don't like the idea of books getting broken up and spread around. I like them being contained. And so I've done that for quite some time now.
Chris Somney keeps all of his pages too, I believe. It's always interesting to see. It often seems like, no offense to anybody else, it often seems it's like the best artists. So it's like, it's kind of amazing, but
it also makes everything else valuable. And I like doing the commissions. So if somebody really, really, really wants, you know, a zeitgeist piece for me, hey, you can make it your dream piece.
Yeah.
You get to decide what zeitgeist is doing, you know? So this is personally for you. That I find thrilling. And I know that it's going to a home that will appreciate it, to do something special in that way. And sure, it costs more, but because of that, my pages have ended up costing more, and the commissions in that way become they look like a bargain.
Yeah.
So everybody wins.
So to close, I want to kind of encapsulate your entire journey, because I do think it's interesting. It's like you're talking about those Conan books and like talking about how buying those 24 issues was kind of like this moment where it's like, yeah, it paid off in the end. It seems like in a lot of ways, no matter what you've been doing, whether it's like hanging out with your brother or, you know, Steve Siegel, or like reading those Conan comics, or et cetera, you've always been learning. You've always been kind of learning something from whatever project you take on. Do you think at this point in your career that you're still growing and improving and learning as an artist?
No doubt about it. Absolutely. In fact, I am impassioned with making sure that what I'm working on today is the best thing I've ever done. It drives me. I want my new stuff to be my best stuff. And I'm constantly revisiting my older work. From time to time, there might be something that I used to do that I stopped doing, and I'll revisit it and go, oh, I like how I did that. Or that technique would work for this. And so I'll pull it back and reintegrate it and expand on it. And it helps me flourish. You know, it creates a progression. And I also remember growing up, building this massive comic book collection and looking at favorite artists and going, oh, have they stopped trying? Like the magic starts to go away. And it's like, oh, I like when this is the era that I like. and then from here on, I don't like it. It doesn't mean as much to me. And I'm sure there are people that have their favorite eras of my work. I like this stuff. I like this stuff, but ultimately an artist has to please themselves first. And if you're fortunate enough to have enough people like what you're doing that you can keep doing it, that's success. And so there, that level has to be reached. But first and foremost, I have to be pleasing myself. I have to be gratifying my desire to improve. With my Madman Atomic comic series, I made a goal for every single issue of that series to have some new, either a storytelling experiment or a technique experiment. And so every issue, there was something that I'm going to try this now, or I'm going to try this now. Some stuff that, and nothing that I would really want to throw in anybody's face. I was very aware of it being subtle enough not to be a distraction from the story. But for me, how can I continue developing? And with that series in particular, it was an absolute plan, a commitment to stretch and do something different with each issue. The one that is the most obvious would be the third issue, which is called Swiped from Dimension X, where every single panel I tried to draw in the style of a different artist. And I did it chronologically. So you'll get E.C. Segar and Hal Foster and Roy Crane and Will Eisner in the earlier pages. And then by the time that you get to the end of the story, I'm integrating the work of my peers. Like there's a panel that I tried to draw like Darwin Cook or Craig Thompson or Steve Rude or Alex Ross or Frank Quitely. So every panel is me trying to draw like a different artist. And whenever available, I would try to learn what tools they used. Did they use a brush? Like Hirschfeld, a cartoonist who was famous for doing a lot of Broadway illustrations and celebrity illustrations. In Fantasia 2000, there's a whole sequence that's animated in his drawing style. So I found out what kind of pen he used and bought one for just that one panel to really try to be as faithful as possible in imitating his style. So I've been fortunate to have all of these wonderful artists actually do their version of Madman for me. But in this particular issue, I was able to try to draw like all of these different artists for myself and to understand why what they did looks the way why it does. Like even there's a Charles Schultz sequence that looks like Madman in a peanut strip,
Yeah.
or Dr. Seuss or Maurice Sendak. So even beyond comic book artists, I wanted to do that. So that was by far the most ambitious in that run, where here's what I'm going to do for this issue. But in other issues, it'd be like, I'll try this graphite technique to create modeling, or one issue was creating the world's largest comic book panel. Issue 9 of that is, if you bought 2 copies of it, it's a series of double page spreads. So if you pulled the staples out, you could have one giant tracking shot, is what it is, like all this action taking place going down this street. On my website, AAApop.com, you can see them all together.
Mm-hmm.
Right at the top, I think there's a link, world's biggest comic book panel, and click on that and you can scroll, or you can see it, big as one big giant, horizontal panel, or you can scroll it like almost like animated.
That's awesome. I have no doubt that you will continue pushing yourself, Mike, but that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on to talk about your career, the Marvel art of Michael Allred, how you continue to push yourself, and everything else. I really appreciate you taking the time.
I appreciate you being interested.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with artist Michael Allred. You can find him on Twitter and Instagram at @AllredMD, and his work in the Marvel art of Michael Allred, an art book that is soon to be kickstarted. Big thanks to Deanna Chapman for stepping in to edit this episode. If it sounds better than usual, it's because of her. Love Off Panel, want to support it? Subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts today and give the show a rating or review while you're at it, but 5 stars only. You can also support the show by backing it on Patreon. Find the show at patreon.com/offpanel, and when you back it on there, you get early access to each week's podcast, as well as weekly content and more. Want even more? Subscribe to my subscription comic site Sketch at sketch.com for long-form articles, interviews, and the rest of the site's content. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by following it on Twitter and Instagram at @SketchComic or following me at @SliceFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including David Byrne, Milton Lawson, David Wilson, Joe, Benjamin Wilkins, Chris Hacker, John Neesmith, John Auerbach, Dustin Weaver, Ninja Assassin Love Story Webcomic, Brandon Heyman, Aiden Hammond, Kenny Myers, Faith Aaron Hicks, Ah Yeah Comics, Ben Rowe, Cameron Brown, Jonathan Breen, Danny Ollie, Charlie Stickney, Tom Drennan, Jeremy Thomas Burke, Jared Schwab, Scott Dunn, Chip Mosher, Seth Pomeroy, James McEwen, Andrew Lehman, Christina Merkler, Scott Place, Travis Gibb, Darcy Van Polges, Tom Evans, Reed Beeman, Kelly Zudakonic, Max Wood, Jeremy Lambert, Brian Hole, Near Levy, Jason Hussad, Kieran Gillum, Jonathan Kent Uratam, Henry Johnson, Django Boren, James Tynan IV, Chris Langford, Jason Wood, Tom Peachy, Ben Domstead, Rom V, Nick Walker, Patrick Coyle, Isaac Oren, Capes and Tights Podcast, Klaus Vandeven, Submen Industries, Jack Mulqueen, Carl Kerschel, Robert Masella, Elza Chartier, Luke Nakashoji, Dr. Luke, Scott Hazelwood, Canadian by Proxy, Bradley Rader, Carl Troy, Brandon DePillis, Patrick Power, Declan Shalvey, Dan Garino, Adam Freeman, Ben Wild, Brian Klein Q, Leona Kangas, Nick Bennett, Daniel Whitfield, Susanna Polo, Reed Hinkley Barnes, Mario Tiambang, Andrew Carita, Stefan Holt, Philip Myra, Chris Pacella, Torin Grunbeck, Buzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Waltz Comics and Books, Akil Wilson, Alex Dimitriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Wesley Giff, Sean Kirkham, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Reinwand, Vita Ayala, Akil, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, David Kelly, Jason Nassy, Adam Bogart, Matthew Taylor, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Braldy, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendrick, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Colin McMahon, Adam Heifel, Fiona Staples, Mark Abnett, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim Demonakos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Wolfpack for letting me use their song Outro as the show's opening theme, and to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's outro and ad music just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.